Good morning, Mets fans, and welcome to a Friday edition of Driving with Mr. Met. I am Mr. Met, and yesterday in our nation's capital, the Mets dropped the third game of the series with the Nationals, losing the rubber game 7-6 in a just a lopsided game for the most part up until the last couple of innings. Tough start for Zach Wheeler. Couple of more injuries for the Mets, and a couple of question marks going into this weekend series with the Marlins. I'm going to talk about the game yesterday. I want to talk about the injuries, and I want to talk about some curious comments from Broxton after yesterday's game. No matter what happens the rest of this season, you'll never convince me that this Mets team doesn't have heart. They clawed back into yesterday's game and came within a run of winning it. Of tying it, and then probably eventually losing it in extra innings. But this team does fight from behind, and I really do like that about them. They really do have a never say die attitude, which is great and makes it kind of enjoyable to watch. More enjoyable, however, when they win games. And yesterday was a perfect example of a game that the Mets really should have won, and they didn't. They didn't, and the blame rests almost solely on Zach Wheeler. So Wheeler was on the mound. He was not good. Gave up 6 runs, I think, across 6 innings of work. So not a good ERA. Strikeouts were down. He was hittable yesterday, and again, the Nationals get on board in the first inning. And the sucky thing about this is just how badly they've been struggling up to this series. It's one thing to lose a series to a division rival, and while they're playing well, but the Mets seem to have this bad habit of helping teams turn things around. And I don't know if that's just something that we see as Mets fans because we watch mostly Mets games and we see them lose to teams like the Nationals and the Phillies and whomever, when those teams seem to be in a bit of a tailspin. I mean, the Nationals were prime and ripe for the picking, and the Mets couldn't get the job done. I mean, they should have easily taken 2 out of 3. And all of the talk about, well, why did the Mets have to start Wilmer Font in the second game of the series? Why didn't they alter the rotation with the off day and blah blah blah? And that is certainly a valid question to ask. But at the end of the day, it shouldn't matter. I mean, you shouldn't have to tinker with the rotation. I mean, look, the Nationals didn't do whatever they had to do to get Scherzer and Strasburg in there against the Mets. And honestly, that might have had something to do with the fact that Wilmer Font pitched the second game of the series. That the Mets didn't have to face Strasburg or Scherzer. Now, they did have to face Corbin, who, as we said yesterday, was really good. But Wilmer Font pitched poorly, whatever, but the Mets were out of that game from the beginning. They were out of that game because Patrick Corbin was excellent. Would not have mattered if DeGrom was on the mound or Syndergaard was on the mound, because the Mets weren't scoring runs. So then we would have had to hear, well, the Mets wasted a DeGrom start. Why did they have to do that? So it was very easy to have this revisionist history view of what happened and whatever. But the Mets lost. The bottom line is the Mets lost this series, and I'm handing out a GOAT yesterday to Zach Wheeler. I'm also handing out a GOAT to Broxton, and not because he struck out to end the game with the bases loaded and the go-ahead run on second base in scoring position and the tying run 90 feet from home on third base. I'm not giving him a GOAT for that. I'm giving him a GOAT for his post-game comments. After the game yesterday, Broxton was interviewed and talked about what happened in that at-bat and whatever, and he sort of alluded to the fact that he feels like he's pressing and trying, quote, extra hard because he doesn't get enough at-bats, he's not getting enough reps, and he feels like he's got to show his value to the team when the spotlight is on him as infrequently as it is. And I get that mentality, and I get that quote, and if it had stopped with that, I would have been okay with it. But he went on to say, I'm confused as to why I'm not playing more. And that was the one that sort of made me scratch my head. Like, this is not an all-star we're talking about here, right? We're talking about a guy who struggles to hit 200, who strikes out a ton, who plays good defense, but I mean, isn't Andrew Jones in center field? I don't understand his questioning of why he's not playing more, or his confusion about why he's not playing more. He's not playing more because he wasn't brought here to be an everyday outfielder. And you know, before everybody takes the side of the player and says the Mets lied to him, just like they did to Devin Mesoraco, let's look at the situation, whether the Mets lied to him or not. Look at the Mets depth chart and who they have in the outfield. Forgetting about the fact that Yoenis Cespedes is coming back later this year, maybe. But the Mets have Conforto, they have Nimmo, they have Lagares. They had no question about it. Off season, the conversation was Jeff McNeil is going to be an outfielder. Last year, they played Dom Smith in the outfield. They had J.D. Davis come in and sign and as a potential outfield option. So I'm looking at this thinking like, okay, Keon, I get that you're kind of bummed that you're not playing, but dude, it isn't that hard to see that you're going to be like number 5 on that list that I just gave you, and that doesn't include Yoenis Cespedes, who's going to bump you down to 6. So I don't understand his frustration. I don't understand his confusion, and I think the way he framed what he said yesterday, I think he's pushing for a DFA, and honestly, I hope that the Mets grant him one. Now, because he's out of options, that's the other part too. Like, he'd be a prime candidate to go down to AAA or up to AAA in the case of Syracuse. But it would be good for him to get down there and get some consistent at bats and see if he can find something. But he's out of options. He cannot be sent down to AAA. So he's going to end up being released, and he'll be claimed by another team, I'm sure, and that'll be that. So. However, that being said, he is eventually going to be released, but it might not be soon. Excuse me, because yesterday, not only did the Mets lose, but to add injury to insult, Michael Conforto and Jeff McNeil both had to leave the game early. McNeil's for a precautionary abdominal pain, strain issue, whatever. And he says it's no big deal. He considers himself day-to-day. Conforto I'm a little bit more concerned about because of the concussion that he suffered from the collision with Robbie Cano. Conforto went down like Josh Reddick did against Pete Alonso in spring training. I mean, he hit hard off Cano's arm, shoulder, and then he hit hard off the ground when he landed. And of course, you know, it had to be on a Howie Kendrick little pop-up dink nonsense hit that ended up causing the collision between Cano and Conforto. And Conforto got the worst for it, and worst of it, excuse me. And the bad part about that was that the at-bat that Broxton took with the bases loaded in the 9th inning would have been Conforto's at-bat. And that's a real kicker to all of that. On a nonsense little bloop shit hit, not only did the Nats get a base runner who I think ended up coming around to score, but they also forced the Mets to lose Conforto for the rest of the game. And it may have cost the Mets the game. Who knows what it's going to cost us going forward is the point, because with concussions, you just never know. You never know how the individual player is going to respond and how they're going to get back. Hopefully it's not serious for Conforto, and it sucks for him because Michael had just sort of heated up a little bit at the plate. He had 3 home runs in his last 5 games. He's been hitting really well, and it just sucks that he's going to be out of the lineup. That said, I think Keon Broxton gets a little bit of a reprieve now, so he gets a few more days to sit on the bench and sulk and complain about the lack of playing time that he's not getting. But the Conforto situation is what it is. The Mets put him on a train. They are not flying him home, which is good. They learned from something that happened 11 years ago to Ryan Church, who, if you all remember, in 2008, had a really nice first half of the season until he suffered a concussion, and he flew home from, I think it was Colorado. I think it was in Denver, and he wasn't the same after that. And it wasn't just the rest of that season. It pretty much cost him his career, which sucks. And the Mets didn't do that to Conforto, so that's a good thing. He did not get on a plane to fly down to Miami. He is going to New York is probably obviously in New York already, and did so via train, which is good. So hopefully things work out for Michael, and he only misses the minimum as far as time is concerned. As far as what the Mets do to replace him, I mentioned Broxton will more than likely remain on the roster, but there's also the option of calling up Carlos Gomez, who's been hitting the ball really well at AAA. The Mets do have to make a decision on Gomez by June 1st based on his contract, so it might end up being that Carlos Gomez gets up for a few games and just to see if he can add something to the lineup, if he has anything left in the tank at the major league level. Finally, something else I didn't talk about this week, and a couple of videos I recorded since the news about Jed Lowry's injury broke, but the injury bug continues with Jed Lowry. He, of course, as we all know now, had a setback. Todd Frazier gets another dodges another bullet. I was thinking the whole time that when Lowry comes back, Frazier might end up being DFA'd himself. But very much like Keon Broxton, the injury to another player is going to give him a second chance. He took advantage of that yesterday, did Todd Frazier. He had a big hit in the Mets' late inning rally that fell just a run shy. But, it is what it is. So that's going to wrap it up for today. Mets take on the Marlins this weekend. We'll see what happens with Matz and Vargas, who are both due to come off the injured list. I don't think Vargas is going to come off, but I'm pretty sure the last I'd heard, Matz will be coming off the injured list. So that's good. We won't need to see, hopefully won't need to see a back-to-back Corey Oswalt, Wilmer Font, or Corey Oswalt, Drew Gagnon, or whatever starts. Hopefully Matz will be back in there and things will be back to normal there. So Mets in Miami have to take all 3 games. It is essential that the Mets get themselves back over 500 at the end of this weekend. The Nats come into Citi Field next week for a 4-game set, and it'd be good if the Mets had some momentum when that series starts. That all starts this evening in Miami. So I'll be back on Monday to wrap up what is hopefully a 3-game sweep. Fingers crossed. But we'll see. Talk about it Monday. Thanks for watching, everyone. I appreciate it. Have a great weekend. And as always, let's go Mets.